Breaking news. Things are already heating up around the Denver Broncos, and we need to talk about something very important. We know how much a strong defense can change the direction of an entire season, and man, the Broncos cannot afford to get this wrong. I really want to see Denver back in the Super Bowl, personally. That is the dream, and why not believe it can happen? After what we just saw against Atlanta, one young player is giving Broncos country another reason to get excited. Jonah Ellis. 5 pressures, 5 hurries, 1 tip pass, and 2 stops in only 20 snaps. That's the kind of performance that gets everybody's attention. And with uncertainty surrounding Jonathan Cooper, Ellis could suddenly become even more important to this team. So I want to know which side you're on. Do you believe Jonah Ellis is ready for a much bigger role right now? Or do you still need to see more before trusting him with that responsibility? Write your opinion in the comments. And if you've been a Denver Broncos fan for more than 15 years, hit that like button hard. All right, Broncos country, let's talk about Jonah Ellis. Now, Broncos country, we have to start with Jonah Ellis, because what he did against the Atlanta Falcons cannot simply be pushed aside as another preseason performance. Yes, it was preseason. Yes, he was facing backups and players fighting for roster spots. We understand all of that, but when a young player gets an opportunity like this, there's only one thing he can control: what he does against the players standing in front of him. And Ellis absolutely took advantage. On only 20 total snaps, Ellis produced 5 pressures, 5 hurries, 1 tip pass, and 2 stops. Think about that for a moment. He was not out there playing the entire game. His opportunities were limited, but his impact was obvious. He actually finished with the third most pressures in preseason week 1 despite playing roughly half the number of snaps of the 2 players ahead of him. That is the kind of production that gets your attention immediately. And this is where we need to talk about something that can sometimes get lost when evaluating pass rushers. Everybody loves sacks. Of course we do. A sack is the big play. It is the number everyone sees in the box score. It can kill a drive, create a huge loss, and bring the entire stadium to its feet. But sacks are not the only way an edge rusher can dominate. Ellis did not have a sack against Atlanta, and yet he constantly affected what was happening around him. He was getting into the backfield. He was creating pressure. He was forcing the offense to react to him. He was making his presence felt without needing that one statistic to prove it. His PFF grades reflected exactly how strong the performance was. Ellis received a 91 overall grade, a 90 pass rush grade, and a 74.8 run defense grade. According to PFF, he had the highest defensive grade among Broncos players in the game. Again, we need to keep the preseason context in mind. The competition was not the same level Denver will see when the regular season begins. But that does not mean we should ignore what happened. If a young player dominates the competition, he is supposed to dominate. That is a good thing. And the exciting part is that Ellis may be moving himself into a much bigger role than people originally expected. Right now, he looks like a player who has clearly established himself in that edge rotation. You can call him the third edge rusher, but after what we saw against Atlanta, the conversation becomes even more interesting. Could he handle an even bigger role if Denver suddenly needs him? That question matters because of the uncertainty surrounding Jonathan Cooper. According to the information we have, Cooper has a court date scheduled for August 31st, 2 weeks before Denver's Week 1 game against the Kansas City Chiefs. The NFL has already started handing down suspensions in other cases around the league, and that creates uncertainty about what could happen with Cooper. There's no way to know the length of any possible suspension, or even exactly what the league will decide. It could be a few games. It could be something different. We simply do not know, and pretending otherwise would be irresponsible. But Denver has to prepare for possibilities. And this is exactly why the development of Jonah Ellis matters so much. If Cooper misses time, the Broncos need players behind Nick Bonitto who can step onto the field and create pressure without the defense falling apart. After what Ellis showed against Atlanta, there's a reason to feel much better about that possibility. The potential edge rotation is becoming very interesting. Behind Bonitto, Ellis can take a major role, followed by K. Robinson and Dondria Tillman, with Drew Sanders also entering the discussion. That brings up another important question. How many edge rushers are the Broncos willing to keep on the final 53-man roster? Denver could decide to keep an extra player at the position, simply because of the uncertainty around Cooper. And if that happens, Sanders could have an opportunity to stick. Sanders made his presence felt late against Atlanta by getting a sack. It was good to see him involved, especially when every preseason snap matters for players fighting for roles and roster positions. But there is an even bigger message here. The Broncos appear to have real confidence in their young edge rushers, and there is one development that makes that point especially clear. Von Miller will not be returning to Denver this season. Miller signed with the Dallas Cowboys, ending the possibility of that reunion for now. Maybe there is another chapter somewhere down the road. Maybe one day there is a chance for that emotional return, and the story comes full circle. But it will not happen this season. And when you look at Denver's current group, you can understand why the Broncos are willing to see what these younger players can do. Ellis is making noise. K. Robinson is part of the rotation. Tillman provides another option. Sanders is trying to earn his place. Denver has choices. That is exactly what you want during preseason. And Ellis was not the only young defender who should have Broncos country talking.
We have to discuss Red Murdoch. If you watched him closely against Atlanta, there were parts of his game that immediately jumped off the screen. One play in particular showed his ability to close quickly from his position and stop an Atlanta player before he could build any forward momentum. Murdoch looked quicker than expected when closing to make the tackle, and physically, he looked the part. He filled out the pads and played with a size and presence that was difficult to miss. But there was another detail that may have been even more interesting. Murdoch attacks the football. When he arrives at the ball carrier, he is not simply thinking about bringing the player down. He is looking for an opportunity to knock the football loose. You could see him trying to punch at the ball while making tackles. There is always a balance there. A defender still has to make sure the tackle is secure. You do not want the hunt for a turnover to become the reason a runner escapes. But you absolutely love seeing that hunger from a young defender. Turnovers change football games. If Murdoch can combine secure tackling with that desire to attack the football, Denver may have found something very interesting. His numbers against Atlanta were impressive. Murdoch finished with 8 tackles, 7 of them solo, and only 1 assisted tackle. He received an 81.5 tackling grade from PFF and a 69.4 overall grade. And there is another number that might tell us even more about how closely Denver is evaluating him. Murdoch played 47 defensive snaps. That was more than any other Broncos defensive player. In the preseason, playing time can tell us a lot. Coaches want to see how players react over extended stretches. They want to see whether someone can repeat good plays, handle different situations, and continue performing when fatigue starts becoming a factor. Denver gave Murdoch plenty of opportunities, and he responded with a performance that absolutely helped his case. At this point, he has put himself right in the middle of the inside linebacker conversation. If the roster had to be decided immediately based on what we have seen, there is a strong argument for Murdoch as the third inside linebacker. And unfortunately, that position battle has also been affected by some very bad news. Lavelle Bailey suffered a broken leg against Atlanta and is expected to miss essentially